Paper 1, Mathematics. So with question number 1, it's testing us about the quadratic equations and the quadratic formulas and our knowledge to do with factorization and stuff like that. So with 1.1.1, they're telling us if we have x squared plus 2x minus 15 is equal to 0. So if someone is to use the factor method, just have to look for two numbers that we multiply to give us negative 15. But when we add those two numbers, we get a 2. So I can open my two brackets. That's x and x. The two numbers would be 5 and then a 3. So I'll use a 5 there and a 3 there. Since this is a positive, then my positive will be there. And that will be a negative. I'll equate this to 0. So through the dot product, my x value here will be a negative 5, or my x value here will be a positive 3. So I just equate the x plus 5 is equal to 0, and I transpose the 5 to that side, or the x minus 3 is equal to 0, and I transpose. You can even use your quadratic formula with a being 1, b being a 2, and c being negative 15. You'll still end up with the same solutions. Then 1.1.2, 5x squared minus x minus 9. Now they're asking us to leave our answers correct to decimal places. So in this case, the easiest option would be to use the quadratic formula. So our a is a 5, our b is a negative 1, and then our c is a negative 9. But we know that the quadratic formula is given as x is equal to negative b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Do the substitution. Our b is negative 1, so negative and negative 1 plus minus the square root of negative 1 squared minus 4. Our a is a 5, and then our c is a negative 9. Then we are dividing all of this by 2 times 5. When I just punch this into the calculator, so I'll have to use one sign at a time in my calculator. So the first x value will be made positive 1,45, and then the other one will be negative 1,25. If I use the calculator. So those are the two values. So normally 2 decimal places. There we go. 1.3 is an inequality. So x squared is less or equal to 3x. Step number 1, move everything to one side so that we have 0 by the right hand side. So it's x squared minus 3x is less or equal to 0. We can factorize this. X out, we have x minus 3 is less or equal to 0. Then from this step, our critical values will be 0 and a positive 3. If we take this to be a 0, and then you solve this, equate it to 0, so which means x is a 3. Then our final representation, I'll use, since this is less or equal to, I'll say 0 is less or equal to x, less or equal to 3. So I can use such notations for as long as my inequality symbol here is less or equal to. If it's greater or equal to, or just greater, then this is not applicable. Then I'll have to use the or. X must be less than the smallest number, and x must be greater than the biggest value, or the biggest critical value that I would have obtained. 1.2. 1.2 is giving us a plus 64 over a is equal to 16. And then they want us to solve for a. So step number 1 would be for you to eliminate this a from the denominator location. I will multiply through by a. So times a, multiply this by a, multiply that by a. So for the first part, I'll have a squared plus 64. I can transpose that to that side. Minus 16a is equal to 0. When I try to rearrange this, I'll have a squared minus 16a plus 64 is equal to 0. So this is just a perfect square. So I'll have a minus 8 squared. So if I'm to open two brackets, a minus 8 and then a minus 8, which is the same as a minus 8 squared being equal to 0. Then if I square root both sides, square root of 0 will be 0. So a minus 8 will be 0. Therefore, my a becomes 8. That's 1.2.1. Then 1.2.2, they are saying hence, which means from what we obtained in the previous question, can we move on and solve for this question? So let me just move this a bit. So we shall have 2 to the exponent of x, or 2 to the power of x. Sorry, this ruler must go away. So 2 to the x plus 2, 6 minus x is equal to 16. I'll try to rewrite this into the format of a plus 64 over a. So that is 2 to the x is equal to, I'll split this, so 2 to the x plus 2 to the 6 times 2 to the negative x is equal to 16. I'll have my 2 to the exponent x plus, we know that 2 to the 6 is 64. I'll take this down and change the sign on the exponent, which is 2 to the x will give me a 16. Then when I'm to compare this equation with the first one, I can see that this a can be represented by this 2 to the x. This a here is also 2 to the x. I have a 64 there, there is a 64, then I have a 16, and there's a 16, which means my a is the same as 2 to the x. So 2 to the x is the same as a, but from the previous question, our a is 8, which means 2 to the x is equal to 8. Then I can write 8 in form of exponential format. So that is 2 to the x is equal to 2 to the exponent of 3. Since the bases are the same, which means the exponents must also be the same. Therefore, our x becomes a 3. That is question 1.2.2. Then question 1.3. They are telling us we have the square root of that. Question 1.3. The square root of 2 to the exponent of 1002 plus 2 to the exponent of 1006. We're dividing this by 17 times 2 to the exponent of 998. So what I'll do, I'll just look for the smallest exponent. There's 998, there's 1006, and then there's 1002. So I will break down these bigger exponents into a format that includes the small ones. So with the first one, I'll have 2 to the exponent of 998 plus a 4. Plus, I have 2 to the exponent of 998 plus 8. And then I'm still dividing it by 17 times 2 to the exponent of 998. When I factor out the 2 to the exponent of 998, I'll have 2 to the 998 into 2 to the exponent of 4 plus 2 to the exponent of 8. It's still under the square root over 17 times 2 to the exponent of 998. Then I'll cancel out what is common. This cancels that. I can simplify my brackets by the numerator. We know that 2 to the exponent of 4 is 16, and then 2 to the exponent of 8 is 256. So 16 plus 256, when I add them, I'll get 272. So I'll have square root of 272 over 17. Which numbers do I multiply to give me 272? I can use 16 times 17 over 17, just to make my life easy. Cancel the 17s, and I'm left with the square root of 16, which is a4. There we go. That is question 1.3. Then with 1.4, solve for x and y simultaneously. This should be free marks. As long as you maintain the consistency and the steps, you should be able to obtain all the marks. So I have two equations. 2x minus y is 2, and then 1 over x minus 3y is equal to 1. So from the two, I can always look for one that I can easily manipulate around. If this is my equation 1, and then this is my equation number 2. From equation 1, which is a linear, I can make y the subject. I can move the y to that side. I can move the 2 to that side. So which means my y is going to be 2x minus 2. I'll call this equation star, which I must substitute into equation number 2. Then from equation 2, I can eliminate this denominator. I'll multiply through by x times x times x and then times x, which means my equation 2 can be 1 minus 3xy is equal to x. This is my other format of equation 2. So I'm going to substitute equation star into equation number 2, so that I obtain 1 minus 3x into, where there is y, we are replacing the 2x minus 2. So that is 2x minus 2. I can move this x that side so that I have a 0 on my right hand side. So opening up this, I'll have, let me just create some clean space somewhere here. Okay, this is better. So then I'll have 1 minus 6x squared, negative 3x times negative 2, that's going to give me plus 6x, and then minus x is equal to 0. Simplifying, I'll have a negative 6x squared plus a 5x, because 6x minus 1x, or x, is a 5x, and then a plus 1 is equal to 0. I can choose to divide through by negative, or I can straight away use my quadratic formula. So if I use the quadratic formula, a is negative 6, b is a 5, and then my c is a positive 1. So it's going to be a 5 negative plus minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4. Our a is a negative 6, and then our c is a 1. And then I'll divide this by 2 times negative 6. When I simplify this, the first x value is a 1, and then my other x value will be a negative 1 over 6. So having obtained that, I'll go back to my equation star. My equation star was saying 2x minus 2 for me to get my values of y. So if I substitute 2x minus 2, I substitute my x values into this equation star. So if I put a 1 there, which means my first y is a 0. Or if I put a negative 1 over 6, 2 times 1 over 6, that's minus 1 over 3 minus 2, which gives me negative 7 over 3. So that is how we go about when we're dealing with simultaneous equations. In normal cases, we expect to have 2 values of x or 2 values of y, depending on what the question is talking about. Okay, then question number 2. Series, number patterns, geometric sequences and progressions. So they are telling us that the first term of an arithmetic is negative 1, and then the 7th term is 35. So the leading word in this statement is arithmetic sequence. So for as long as they talk about arithmetic sequence, we must use the nth term of an arithmetic, which is Tn is equal to a plus n minus 1 into d. So if our first term, our a, is negative 1, we know that the 7th term is 35. So if I'm looking for T7, it's going to be a plus 7 minus 1, which is a 6d. I'll replace my a with that negative 1. I'll replace T7 with the 35. So this is going to be a 35 is equal to negative 1 plus a 6d. I'll transpose this to that side. Since negative become a positive, so 36 is equal to 6d. Divide both sides by 6, which means my d is a positive 6. Those are easy marks, we have them. Then 2.1.2, they want us to get the number of terms in the sequence if the last term is 473. So when they talk of the last term, it's more like the nth term is 473. So that is our Tn. They are looking for the n. So from the formula still of the arithmetic, a plus, we said n minus 1 times our 6. Our Tn is the 473. Our a was a -1. When I open this up, I'll have a 6n minus 6. I'll simplify my right-hand side. I have -7 plus the 6n is equal to 473. Then I'll transpose the -7 to my left-hand side. I'll have 480 is equal to 6n. I'll divide both sides by 6. So over 6 and over 6, which means n is going to give me 80. So which means we have 80 terms within this sequence. 80 terms within this sequence. Then 2.1.3, they want the sum of the first 40 terms. Remember, we're still dealing with an arithmetic. So the formula for the sum of an arithmetic, we can obtain it from the formula sheet at the back. We know that Sn is given by n over 2 into 2a plus n minus 1 into d. Some people might look for the 40th term first of all, and then they use that other one of a plus l and n over 2. The choice is yours. All we want is the answers and we get the marks, then we move forward. So S40 is going to be 40 over 2 into 2. Remember, our first term was a -1 plus 40 minus 1, that's a 39. And then we multiply this by 6. As soon as you've shown us the formula you're using, the substitution, we expect to have an answer by the next step because we don't have time to waste. So that is 4640. If I punch that into my calculator. Okay, guys, we move on. Question 2.2. With 2.2, they're telling us 75, 53, 35, 21 is a quadratic number pattern. 2.2.1, determine the fifth term. So one thing we need to know about a quadratic pattern is that it has two differences. We have the first difference and then the second difference. But we know that the first difference forms an arithmetic, and then the second difference is always constant. So what are we doing to the 75 to give us a 53? We are subtracting 22. We are subtracting 18. We are subtracting 14. So which means we can subtract a 10 to give us 11. So which means our fifth term is 11. Then 2.2.2. 2.2.2, they're asking us for the nth term or the general formula of a quadratic. So we know that the general term of a quadratic is normally given as an squared plus bn plus c. So from the pattern that we've been given, we should be able to determine the values of a, b, and c. So a can be obtained from the second difference. What am I doing to the -22 to give me -18? I'm adding a 4. 18 to that, I'm adding a 4, which is a constant difference. So which means my 2a is equal to a 4. Then I can divide both sides by 2 to determine my a, which is a being a 2. Then I will use this -22 with 3a plus b. It should be equal to -22. But our a is a 2. I'll substitute a with a 2, which means b is going to be -22 minus 3 times 2. That gives me -28. And then I'll use my first term. So a plus b plus c must give us a 75. I'll replace my a with 2, my b with a -28. So that is 2 minus 28 plus c gives me 75. Guys, help me. What do we get there for c? So c, if I use my calculator, I'm ending up with 75 plus 26. Because 2 minus this is negative 26. I transpose it, I get 101. Then my Tn, which they want, my A is a 2, so that is 2n squared, plus the B is negative 28, sorry, so I'll just remove this, and I'll use negative 28n, and then plus the 101. So leave it like that, and then you move on. So with the next question, they're asking us, determine the maximum value of this pattern. Determine the maximum value of this pattern. So when I look at this pattern, I can see negative 15, negative 53 over 5, negative 7, negative 21 over 5, and so on. So it only makes sense if I'm to compare it with the original, that we got these numbers of the 75, the 53, the 35, the 21, and we divided them by negative 5. Because 75 divided by negative 5, I end up with a negative 15. This divided by negative 5, I get that. 35 divided by negative 5, I get that. So for me to get the maximum value, I need to first of all determine the Tn of this new pattern of ours. So what I'll do, since the patterns just look more or less the same, but just with a division of negative 5, I can get my general term of the quadratic and multiply it. So the new Tn is gonna be 1 over 5, 1 over negative 5, 2n squared minus 28n plus 101. When I open this up, I'll get negative 2 over 5n squared plus the 28n over 5 minus 101 over 5. So this is the new pattern. But now we must use this new pattern to determine the maximum value. Remember, with a quadratic sequence, quadratic pattern, we're talking about a parabola. So with this parabola, it's a frowning parabola, which means it's having a maximum value somewhere. How do we determine the maximum value or the minimum value? It's x is equal to negative b over 2a. So our b is 28 over 5. Our a is negative 2 over 5. So we substitute that. So negative 28 over 5, we are dividing it by 2 times our a, which is negative 2 over 5. Put this into the calculator. I'm gonna get 7 as my answer. But this 7 is just like the x-coordinate of the turning point. The question wants the maximum value, which maximum value must correspond to the y-coordinate. So I'll substitute this 7 into this equation. So it's going to be negative 2 over 5 times 7 squared plus 28 over 5 times 7 minus 101 over 5. And the answer that I get is a negative 3 over 5. So this becomes our maximum value that we need. That is question 2, guys. We move on. Question number 3. Question 3, they are telling us consider the following geometric sequence. We have 1024, 256, and 64. So the properties of a geometric is that it has a common ratio which can be obtained by T2 over T1 or T3 over T2 between the consecutive terms. If we divide them, we get a common ratio. They want us to calculate the 10th term. So keyword here, geometric. So the Tn of a geometric is given as AR n minus 1. Do we have the A? Correct. The R, we need to find it. So how do we find the R? We said T2 divided by T1. So 256 divided by 1024. We divide that, we get 1 over 4. We just substitute that. So we are saying T10 is going to be our A, which is 1024 times 1 over 4 to the exponent of 10 minus 1. punch this into the calculator, and then we end up with 1 over 256. 1 over 256. So that becomes our answer. That becomes our answer. We prefer it to be in a fraction other than a decimal, because it might look weird, because I know some people enjoy rounding off to 2 decimals, and now with the 2 decimals it will be 0,000 something, which won't make sense. So rather leave it as a fraction. Then 3.1.2, they're telling us we have this symbol, which is summation. Some people call it sigma. From p equals to 0 up to p equals to 8 of that. They want us to calculate. So whenever they ask you to calculate with this sigma, it's like we need to find the sum of the terms from the point where p is 0 up to a point where p is 8. Now, what we need to know is this a geometric or an arithmetic? But since this is under 3.1, it's automatically geometric. Then what we need to do, we have our r as 1 over 4. We can find that. How? By replacing p with a 0. If we substitute p with a 0 to get the first term, this will die out. And then we shall have 256. And then if p is 1, if p is 1, sorry, we said if p is 0, this is just going to be 256 times 4, which is 1024. And then if p is 1, it dies out to give us the 256. Sorry, this is t2, and then that is t1, which is more or less like this original pattern. So our r will take us back to 1 over 4. And then we need the sum of a geometric. We know that sum of a geometric is given as a into 1 minus rn over 1 minus r. But then how many terms are we talking about here? So it is 0 and 8. From 0 to 8, those are 9 terms. So which means 8 minus 0 plus 1 will give us 9 terms. So the sum of the first 9 terms, our a is 1024, into 1 minus, our common ratio is 1 over 4 to the exponent of 9. And then we divide this by 1 minus our r, which is 1 over 4. Do this, punch it in the calculator, and then we have 87381 over 64, which can be the same as 1365,33. You can leave it this way or that way, your choice. So that is the sum. So step number 1, we said, try to determine the terms within the pattern, determine the common ratio, and then apply the sum formula of a geometric. All right. Then 3.2, they're telling us that the first 2 terms of a geometric sequence are given. Have that, we have that. Determine the values of t for which the sequence will converge. So keyword is converge. So the condition for convergence to take place, -1 is less r, less 1. So r must be between -1 and +1. So since we have the t1 and the t2, we need to find the common ratio. Okay. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna try to break this down. Break this down. So if I factorize out the negative, it's gonna be negative t squared plus 6t plus 9. Move backwards, it's gonna be x plus 3 squared. So I factorize that, it's gonna give me this. That's x squared, 6x, and then t. So this is my t1. Then when I look at my second term, it's talking about t cubed. This, and that. So when I look at just the numerator, my numerator is like a cube of 2 numbers. which cube would be the same as if I get t plus 3 cubed, because we know that t plus 3 and then t plus 3 for the first two, I'll have t squared plus 6t plus 9. And then when I multiply this by t plus 3, I'll have t cubed, I'll have 6t squared, I'll have 9t. I multiply that, I'll have my 3t squared, I'll have my 18t, I'll have the 27. Collecting the like terms, t cubed plus that and that is 9t squared. This and this gives me the 27t plus my 27. There I go. So I'll just express it as this. But since there's a 2 over, I'll say divide by 2. So I have my t1, then I have my t2. Then I need to divide the 2 to get my common ratio. So then I'll have t plus 3 cubed. I'm dividing this by 2 divided by t plus 3 squared. T plus 3 squared. So instead of dividing like this, I'll just transpose that sign. I'll change it to multiplication, and then I'll have t plus 3 squared down here. I cancel out this with 2 of the brackets. I'll only be left with t plus 3 over 2. So this is my common ratio. Then when I apply my condition, t plus 3 over 2 into that condition, remember we said -1 must be less than the common ratio, which is, did we include the negative? Can we just go back and check, please? We said it's negative t squared. Why are we leaving it? Please, let's go with our part. Okay, so which means our common ratio is going to change. I can include it, put this as a bracket with a negative sign. So even down here, when I'm applying the condition, I'll have to include it. So negative t plus 3 over 2 is less than 1. Can multiply through by 2. So that I have -2. -2 is less, I open that up, negative t minus 3 is less than 2. So we say times 2, and then times 2. This cancels that. So -2, we have our negative that, and then positive 2. Then I move these 3 on other sides. So when it comes this side, it will be a positive. So it means it will be a 1 is less than negative t. Is less than negative t. Then when I move that side, I have a 5. Then I'll divide through by -1, which means -1 is less than t, then is less than 5. Is that true? It's a negative here. Okay, which can also be written as -5 is less than t, and then less than -1. So that will be the values of t under which the sequence will converge. Values under which the sequence will converge. So guys, that's that with that question. Then question number 4, they're telling us the graph g of x. Remember, g of x is the same as y. Okay, so it's like y is equal to a 1 over 3 the exponent of x plus this passes through this. They want us to get the value of a. So what we do, we have our x value here, we have our y value. Let's substitute y into that. So that's going to be 10 is equal to a 1 over 3 to the exponent of -2 plus 7. I'll move the 7 to that side. I'll get a 3 is equal to a times. This will be 1 over 3 to the negative 2. When I move this upwards, the sign on the exponent will change to positive, so that is 9. In other words, I have 9a is equal to 3, which means my a is 1 over 3. That is for 4.1. Then 4.2, they're asking us for the coordinates of the y-intercept. So since we have our a, we can replace it back and say that our equation of g of x is the same as 1 over 3 into 1 over 3 to the x plus 7. So for y-intercept, x must be a 0, or at the y-intercept, x is always a 0. Replace x with a 0 there. So which means y is equal to 1 over 3 into 1 over 3 to the 0 plus 7. So any number to the exponent of 0 will always be 1. 1 times 1 over 3, it will be 1 over 3 plus 7. Simplifying this will just give us a 22 over 3. So the y-intercept is 22 over 3. 4.3, we have this equation h of x, which is this. Describe the translation that took place between g to give us h. We can go back and say, okay, our g of x was 1 over 3 times 1 over 3x plus 7. But this can also be written, since the bases are the same, we can add up the exponents. It's 1 over 3 to the exponent of x plus 1, and then plus the 7. That is still the g. So the question is, what did we do to this to get back to that? So in this new equation of ours, we don't have a 1, and then we don't have a 7. So which means this graph was moved. For us to eliminate this, there has to be a negative 1, which means there is a shift to the right. Okay, and then the 7 will be shifted downwards. So we shift the graph 1 unit to the right, and then 7 units downwards. So that is the transformation that took place. Then 4.3.2, 7 units down, 1 unit to the right. Okay, determine the equation of the inverse of h. So inverse of h, as long as it is exponential, the inverse will always be a log. This is the base, it must also be a base there. Put the x there, y is equal to, and then you're done. Don't have to stress much about this. Get the base of the exponential, apply it as a base of the log. The x must be put there, and then the y there. That is question 4.3.2. And then question number 5, they are telling us to consider g of x. Remember we said g of x is the same as y, a over x plus b plus q. So what type of graph is this? It's a hyperbola. So the following is given. The domain is x is a set of real numbers, x cannot be negative 2. So for as long as they tell us this, which means this negative 2 is an asymptote. That is a vertical asymptote. Then the y-intercept is that, okay, and then there's another, sorry, the x-intercept is this, and then the y-intercept is that. Show that the graph G is given by this. Okay, so from the first set of information given, we can replace P with these two. So which means our y is equal to a over x plus 2. Remember, we always change the sign. If it's positive here, then it will be a negative. If it's a negative here, then here it will be a positive. And then plus q. And then we can use a set of 2 points. Let's see at the x value or the x-intercept. X is 1 and then y is 0. I'll replace this with a 0. That is my a. Remember, x is a 1, so 1 plus 2, that's a 3. plus q. Okay, which means my q is negative a over 3. That can be my equation number 1. Then I use the y-intercept. So this is x, and then that is y. So still from there, I'll have negative 1 over 2 is equal to my a over my x, we said is a 0. So 0 plus 2, that's going to be 2 plus my q. I can decide to use this, which is negative a over 3. And then I solve for my a. So using your normal fractions, I can see that my LCM is going to be 6. Why don't I just multiply through by 6? Times 6, times 6, and then times 6. So that I have a negative 3 is equal to 3a minus 6a. Sorry, minus 2a. That's 3a minus 2a. So 3 minus 2 is 1a. So it means my a is negative 3. And then I can take this a and then substitute it somewhere here to get my value of q. So q is negative 3 over 3. And then that gives us a positive 1. Therefore, my g of x, we have our a, which is a negative 3 over x plus 2, and then our q is a plus 1. Okay, there we go. Then they're asking us to determine, sorry about that. They're asking us to determine the value of the range. They want us to get the range value. What am I doing, guys? I'm sorry. The range, how do I make this an erase? Okay, that's fine, doesn't matter. So range, so when we talk about the range, it's like for the y values that we're looking for which y values is this graph existing. So if someone were to draw some sort of a mini sketch, okay, so we know that positive 1 is somewhere there as our asymptote, and then negative 2 is somewhere there, and then we just sketch our graph. This is a negative, so which means we expect it to be in quadrant number 1 and quadrant number 3. So it's something like that. So the y-intercept is 0 and negative a half. That doesn't make sense though. That doesn't make sense. Eraser, where are you? Okay. So we're saying the y-intercept, x is 1 and 0. 1 and 0 is somewhere here. And the y is 0 and negative a half, which is somewhere here. So we have this kind of graph. Okay, so for the y values, yes, the graph can extend within all the positive y values and all the negative y values, but it cannot cross this asymptote. So it just tells us that y is a set of real numbers, but y cannot be a 1. Y is an element of real numbers, but y cannot be 1. So that becomes the range. And then 5.3, they're asking us for the equation of the axis of symmetry. So we have 2 axes of symmetry. 2 lines that divide this graph equally. So we have one that is usually given as x plus c. This is with a positive gradient. And then we have another one with negative x plus c. So in this case, they're focusing on the gradient being 0. So which means we're going to look at something like this. So for us to get this equation, just use the coordinates of the intersection of their asymptotes. So they intersecting at -2 and 1. So y is 1. Now x is -2 plus c, which means c is a 3. And the equation becomes x plus 3. That is 5.4. And then 5.5, write down the coordinates of the image of k reflected over h. Reflected over h. So the line of focus is something like this. That is the line of focus. And then they are telling us we need the k. Our k was 1 and 0, this point. When we reflect it, it must be seen in that other direction, somewhere here. So if we apply our midpoint concept, the points here should give us okay, I have this. So I'm gonna get a -3 and then a +4 as a reflection of this point. Okay, so that is question number 5. And then question number 6. Question 6, they are telling us that the sketch below shows a graph of f, which f is -x squared minus 6x plus 7. C is the y-intercept, A, B are x-intercepts, D is -5 and k, which is a point on f. Then they want the coordinates of E, which is the turning point. So for as long as the parabola in this sort of format, for us to get the turning point, we shall use -b over 2a. So in this case, our b is a -6. So -6 over 2, and then our a is a -1. Simplifying that, I'll end up with a -3. That is the x coordinate of the turning point. Then we need to find the y coordinate. Just substitute this into the main equation. So f of -3 will be -3 squared minus 6 times -3 plus 7. And this is going to give me a 16. So which means the coordinates here are -3 and 16. That is 6.1. -3 and 16. And then 6.2, write down the value of k. So k is the y coordinate of point D, but the x is -5. So I can put this -5 back into the function and get the value of k. So I'll say f of -5 is going to be negative, and then -5 squared minus 6 times 5 plus the 7. So when I simplify this, I'm going to have -25 minus, this is a -25 plus 30 plus 7. And that will give me a 12, which means k is a 12. That is also done. And then 6.3, determine the equation of a straight line that is passing through CD. So if I'm talking about CD, if we're talking about CD, if we have a line that is drawn just passing through there, we know that the general equation of a straight line is given as y is equal to mx plus c. All we need is just the gradient, and the gradient is given as the change in y over the change in x. What are the coordinates of c? We know that c is the y-intercept, so x is 0. When you replace x with a 0, we shall be left with that 7. So we have this as -5, 12, 0, and 7. So our change in y will be 12 minus 7 over -5 minus 0. And then I'll end up with a -1. So my equation is just going to be -x plus 7. -x plus 7. So that becomes the equation of my line CB. And then 6.4. 6.4, they're asking us, there's a tangent that is parallel to CD but touches F at P. Determine the coordinates of P. Determine the coordinates of P. So there's an imaginary line that must touch this graph at one point. I don't know, it could be somewhere there, but not through the turning point. But these lines must not be touching at all. It could be in whichever format. So if this is P with X and Y, all I know is that at the point of touching, the gradient is going to be -1, because for as long as the lines are parallel, then the gradients must be the same. The gradients have to be the same. So then what we do, for me to get the gradient of a curve, I'll find the first derivative. So the first derivative of, where is this equation of ours? Hello. It's -x² minus 6x. -x² minus 6x plus 7. That's our equation. Then the first derivative is like the gradient function, the equation that we can use to determine the gradient at any point of this graph. So that's going to be minus 2x minus 6. But they are telling that this must be the same as -1. Then I can solve for my x. Okay, so when I move the 6 that side, it will give me a +6, and then -2x is going to be equal to a 5, which means my x is -5/2. So that is my x coordinate of P. Then for me to get the y coordinate, I'll take this and then substitute it into the original to get the y. So which means my f of -5/2 is going to be -5/2 squared minus 6 times -5/2 minus, let's say, plus 7. When I punch this into my calculator, I'm getting 63/4, which means my coordinates of P are -5/2 and then 63/4. So those are the values of the x and the y coordinates. Then 6.5, for which values of x? For which values of x will f of x minus 12 be greater than 0? F of x minus 12 is greater than 0. So what we need to do is look at the graph. Where do we find, I can move this 12 that side, and then I have f of x is greater than 12. So where do I find the graph to be above the 12 of the y? Because f of x is y. Where do I find y to be greater than 12 on this graph of ours? So if I'm to draw some sort of a line somewhere here, a horizontal line, and this is my 12 for the y. So between this x coordinate, which I don't know, and between this x coordinate, which I know, -5, those are the 2 points where I'll find the graph to be above 12. So this area, this is the area of interest. So between which x values. So since I know that E is having x as -3 and it's a turning point, what did I do to this -3? Oh, how many units do I have between -3 and -5? Someone will say you have 2 units. So which means if I create 2 units also from there up to there, which means I'm going to be left with a -1 at this point. So which means -1 and -5. So this point is a -1. So my values of x will be between -5 and -1. I'll just write it as -5 is less x and less 1, negative. So these will be the values between which f of x will be greater than that. Okay, guys, that's question number 6. We're moving. We are getting there. Question number 7. Finance. Guys, this is doable. Eh? As much as there's a whole lot of reading, a whole lot of what, just know your formulas, just know your terms, and then you'll be good to go. So with this, they are telling us that how many years will it take for an investment to double in value if it earns interest at a rate of this compounded quarterly? Now we don't have any sort of amount that is given, and this confuses learners in most cases because of like, which value are we using, which amount are we gonna use? They don't understand this doubling thing. So in such a case, if no amount is given to you and they're talking about doubling or halving or anything of the sort, just let your initial value to be x. So which means how many years will it take x to double? When it's doubling, it's going to become 2x, which means our a is 2x. And then we're good to go. So which means a is equal to p plus 1 plus I to the exponent of n. This is just a single payment. It's not multiple payments. So I'll use my a as 2x, and then that is x. 1 plus, what do we need? We need the n. So our I is 8.5%, which is 0.085. Divide by 4, since we are compounding it quarterly, I'll set to the exponent of 4n. Divide both sides. I'll divide both sides by x, and then I'll simplify this. I'll have a 2 is equal to 1 comma. I don't know, some people would prefer to use the fraction, like the common fraction, and others would prefer to use the decimals. The choice is entirely yours. So if I choose to use the common fraction, what am I gonna have? I'll have something like 817. So 817 over 800 to the exponent of 4n. So for as long as I'm looking for n, which is an exponent, then I'm gonna use my logs. So you press your calculator with that log button that is having something there and something you have to call to fill in. So this 4n will be on my left hand side. So this is my base. So which means it's 817 over 800 into, I'll put the 2 here. If I simplify that, I'll need to even get rid of this 4 as well. So simplifying that will give me a 32 comma something. What are you guys having? I'm having, okay, come on. I'm having 32,964. So 4n is equal to 32,964. Then I'll divide both sides by 4, which means my n is going to be 8,24. 8,24 years. So this is how long it's going to take for that amount to double and so on. All right, 7.2. A company purchased machinery for 500,000. After 5 years, the machinery was sold for 180,000, and the new machinery was bought. They want the rate of depreciation of the old machinery over 5 years using reducing balance. Please do not confuse the simple depreciation or the straight line depreciation with the reducing balance. So the reducing balance formula is given as, this is 7.2.1. A is equal to P into 1 minus I to the exponent of n. So this 500,000 is the initial amount. It's going to represent our P, and then this is our A, and then our n is 5. Let's substitute. So this is 180,000 is equal to 500,000 into 1 minus I, which we don't know, to the exponent of 5. Then we shall divide both sides by 500,000 because we want to get to the I. So you first of all get rid of what is around the bracket. That cancels, and then I have 180,000 divided by 500,000. Don't betray me, guys. We have 0.36. Okay, 0.36 is equal to 1 minus I to the exponent of 5. Then for me to get rid of the 5, I must find the fifth root on both sides. So that cancels. I'm just left with 1 minus I. And then the fifth root of that is going to give me 0.815193. So I would advise you guys not to use 2 decimals before the final answer. At least 4 would be reasonable before you get to the final answer. Then move this one to that side. It will be a subtraction. You'll end up with negative 0.1848 is equal to negative I. Then divide both sides by a negative 1 and then multiply by 100, which means my I is going to be 18.48%. So that is my rate of depreciation for marks in. For marks in. 7.2.2. They are telling us that the rate of inflation for the machine is 6.3 over the 5 years. What will the new machinery cost at the end of the 5 years? So when you talk of inflation, this is compound interest, straight compound interest. So we shall just say A is equal to P into 1 plus I to the exponent of N. Our P is the original amount, which was 500,000, into 1 plus the 6.3%. So 6.3 divided by 100 is going to give us 0.063. So 0.063 to the exponent of 5. We simplify that in the calculator. We're going to get 67863 5.11. In other words, we have 678,635 francs and 11 cents. So that is the value of the machine after 5 years. 7.2.3, a company decides to set up a sinking fund. So whenever we talk about a sinking fund, we're going to use the future value or the F formula and make the first payment into the fund on the day the old machinery was bought. So which means there is a payment that is made immediately. So if we're talking of 5 years, which means there is an extra payment. Okay, let's go on. Then the last payment was made 3 months before the new machinery was purchased at the end of the 5 years. Okay, now the scenario changes. The interest rate on the sinking fund is 10.25 compounded monthly, the money from the sinking fund, and this from the sale was used to pay for the new machinery. Determine the monthly payments. So what we need to know, or what we need to establish, is first of all our various variables. So we know that F is given as X into 1 plus I to the exponent of N minus 1 divided by I. Do we know the future value that we're focusing on? What is our target? Remember, when the old machine is sold, we're going to end up with 180,000. Okay? And then the new machine is going to cost this much. So if this is available, or if this is going to be available, how much are we going to be shorting with? So we shall get our 678,635.11. We subtract the 180,000. If that is done, which means our F is gonna be 498635,11. So that's the future value. This is the target that we must raise within that period of time. Then our I is going to be, this is compounded monthly, so it's 0,1025 divided by 12. That's the I. X is what we're looking for. And then N. With N, there were 5 years initially, 0 up to 5. There was a payment that was made. So within 5 years, if you're compounding it monthly, we were meant to have 60. There was an initial payment that was made initially. It was meant to be 61 payments. But now, since the last payment is made 3 months before, we can subtract the 3. And then we end up with a 58. So which means 58 installments are gonna be made. And then we just substitute that into our formula. So from there, I will try to make X the subject. So X is gonna be F times I over 1 plus I to the exponent of N minus 1. So sinking fund, we said we use the future value formula. So our F future value, we said it's 498635,11 times the interest rate. We said it's 0,1025 divided by 12. Then I'm gonna divide this by 1 plus 0,1025 over 12 to the exponent of 58 minus 1. I'll do that, punch that in the calculator, and I'm gonna end up with 6,678,62 rand. So which means every month I must use that. So guys, remember, when we're talking about future value, present value, just make sure that the amounts are continuous. It's not a single payment, it's not a single investment, it's not a single amount that was loaned out. It's just continuous payments going on and on and on. Loans, we normally use the present value, and then any sort of investment, we apply the future value method. That is question number 7. Question number 8, calculus. Okay, 8.1, first principles. So with the first principles, we need to know the formula. Which formula tells us that the limit as h tends to 0 of f of x plus h minus f of x divided by h. Okay, so this is our f of x. What's gonna be our f of x plus h? Where there is x, replace x plus h. So it's a negative x plus h squared. Substitute into the formula, so it's the limit as h tends to 0. Where there is this, I'll replace it with that. So it's a negative x plus h squared minus my f of x, which is negative x squared. So negative x squared. Sorry, what's wrong with me, man? Wake up. Okay, so negative, I'll say negative x squared. That's negative over h. Then time for opening up the brackets. So h tends to 0. We shall have a negative into this bracket is the same as x squared plus 2xh plus h squared. This and this is going to give us a plus x squared over h. Then the limit as h tends to 0, I'll open my bracket with a negative sign. I'll have negative x squared minus 2xh minus h squared plus x squared over h. So usually whatever is with f of x must always cancel out. So this cancels that. I have negative 2xh minus h squared. My next step is a step where I do my factorization. I'll take out the h, and then I'll be left with negative 2x minus h over h. So I cancel that and that. My next step is just to substitute h with a 0 because h is tending to 0, and then I'll be left with negative 2x. So those are the steps that you have to go through. Remember, this limit of h tends to 0 must be maintained. It's only the last step where you have to leave it out. Okay, that is first principles. Then 8.2, determine the first derivative of this function of f, 4x cubed minus 5x squared. So we need to use that rule. If we have ax to the n, and that is y. So our dy dx, or our first derivative, is an xn minus 1, something like that. So we're going to have 4 times 3 to the exponent of 3 minus 1, minus 5 times 2, x to the exponent of 2 minus 1. So that's going to be 12x squared minus 10x. So that is 8.2.1. So 12x squared minus 10x. That's our answer. Then 8.2.2, they're asking us the x. So if they talk about the x, it's just the same thing. Determine the first derivative. Find the y dx. Okay, so we have some symbols involved, some surds involved, and then there's a division and a denominator involved. So we're going to split up and we're going to change these root signs. Okay, so that is going to be dx into, that's going to be negative 6. This is going to be x to the exponent of 1 over 3 plus 2. Everything is over x to the exponent of 4. Okay, and then the x, I'll split up negative 6, x1 over 3 over x to the 4 plus 2 over x to the 4. And then I'll simplify this. Since these are exponents, they have the same bases, I'll subtract the exponents. 1 over 3 minus 4. I'll get, is it negative 11 over something? Yes. So the x into negative 6, that is x negative 11 over 3. And then this, I'll just transpose that on top, that is the negative 4. The sign on the exponent will change. Then it's time for me to find the first derivative. So I'll get this negative 11 over 3. I'll multiply it by my coefficient here. So which means it's going to be just 22x, negative 11 over 3 minus 1. Negative 11 over 3 minus 1, I'm getting negative 14 over 3. The negative 4 times 2 gives me negative 8x, negative 4 minus 1, that's a negative 5. So I can leave it like that for as long as the question has not asked me to leave my answer with positive exponents. But in case it does, that will be 22 over x 14 over 3 minus 8 over x, the exponent of 5, something like that. Okay, that is 8.2.2. Question 8 is done. All right, we move on to question number 9. Question 9, where are you? There you are. All right, question 9. Sketch below is the graph of f of x. Sketch below is the graph of f of x. X cubed plus x squared plus bx plus c. They're telling us the x-intercepts of f are 3, 0, and m, where m lies on the negative. K has these coordinates, y-intercept of f, m, and n are the turning points. There we go. Can we show that f can be given in this sort of format? So, number one, when you look at this graph, m is an intercept. That's number one. And then it's also a turning point, which means when we are writing out our equation, let's say we use k, that's going to be x minus x1 squared, which represents this value of the turning point and then the intercept. And on top of that, remember with a cubic function, we must have 3 roots. So 2 of the roots are just concentrated within the m. Okay, and then this is x minus my x2. This can be the general equation of a cubic function, whereby x1 and x2 are gonna be our roots. So since my coefficient of x cubed is a 1, which means my k is a 1, which means that's y is equal to, I'll say x minus x1 squared into x. This is a positive 3, so that will be a negative 3. Okay, then I can use this point k and say that at k, where x is 0, y is negative 3, so I'll say negative 3 is equal to, I put there 0, I'll have negative x squared. And then I replace this with a 0, and then that I'll have a negative 3. Then divide both sides by negative 3. I'll end up with a 1. So x squared is equal to a 1. Remember, this is x1. And then I find the square root. So which square root is meant to be plus or minus 1? But then since we're talking about a negative axis, which means x is negative 1. Then I'll replace this into that original. Now I can even put it here since I already have mine. So that's y is equal to x plus 1 squared into x minus 3. I can open this up first. I'll have x squared plus 2x plus 1 into x minus 3. And then when I open this bracket of mine, this and this will be x cubed. This and this will be 2x squared. This and this will be just a plus x. Then 3 and negative will be negative 3x squared. That's a negative 6x. And then that's a negative 3. Collect the like terms. I have x cubed. So this and this, I'll have a negative x. This and this, I'll have a negative 5x. And then I'll have a minus 3, which is the same as that. Okay, that's 9.1. The 9.2, they're asking us for the coordinates of n. We know that n is a turning point. Okay, and at the turning points, the gradient of the graphs will always be 0. So with the turning points, I can find the first derivative. So I'll say f of x, or f prime of x, is going to be 2x squared. Sorry, this is squared. Minus 2x minus 5. Are we on the right track? No, man. Sorry. What's happening? That TIG is kicking in. Eh? So that's going to be 3x squared minus 2x minus 5. I'll equate it to 0 since the gradients are always 0. I can use my quadratic formula, or I can use my factors. That's x. I can use this as 3x. And then with 5, I can put my 5 here. I can put my 1 there. Negative can go there. This can be a positive. Okay. So my x is going to be negative 1, which represents the m that we have. And then on this side, our x is going to be 5 over 3. So between the two, we know that negative 1 is for m, which means the 5 over 3 is going to represent n, the fact that it's also positive. Then I'll get this 5 over 3, and I'll substitute it into the original. So that it's 5 over 3 cubed minus 5 over 3 squared minus 5 times 5 over 3 minus 3. And then my y coordinate is going to be negative 256 over 27. So the coordinates of n are going to be 5 over 3 and negative 256 over 27. There we go. 9.3. For which values do we find f of x to be less than 0? For which values of x do we find f of x to be less than 0? Remember, this original graph is f, the whole of it. So where do we find it? We know that f of x represents y. And then along the y axis, x is equal to 0. So where do we find? So along the y-axis, y is equal to 0. So where do we find the graph below the x-axis? From which points of x? So at exactly 3, the graph is equal to 0. At exactly -1, the graph is equal to 0. So we could say that x can be less than -1, and then -1 should be less than x and less than this point of intercept, which is at 3. So below -1, the graph is less. And then below 3 and -1, the graph is also still less. Someone could also state x is less than 3. That would also make some bit of sense. Okay. The 9.3.2, where do we find f to be increasing? So when the graph is increasing, we look at just the gradient. So along this format, sorry, I need the red one. So along this format, the graph is increasing. So that is a plus. And then here, this section, it's a negative because the graph is dropping. And then from here, the graph is increasing. So we can look at just the turning points. We say this is 5/3, and then this is a -1. So the graph will increase for values of x less than -1, or for values of x that are greater than 5/3. So those are the two intervals that we can use. And then 9.3.3, where do we find the graph to be concave up? So whenever they talk about concavity upwards or downwards, most cases we can look at the turning points. Okay, so if it's the turning point, we look at the -1, and then we look at the 5/3, and we find the midpoint of the two. So -1 plus 5/3 divided by 2, that will be the x coordinate of the turning point. Alternatively, for concavity especially, we normally take the second derivative. And we say second derivative of x. Our first derivative was 3x squared minus 2x minus 5. So the second derivative is going to be 6x minus 2. We equate, must be greater. If it's concave up, we use the inequality sign of greater than 0. Move the 2 that side, which means x must be greater than 1/3. That is 9.3.3. The 9.4, determine the maximum vertical distance between f and then the first derivative. So we know that this first derivative is a parabola. So if we were to sketch this parabola of ours, we got 2 answers for this parabola, which was -1 and then 5/3, which means if we were to draw this parabola, it's positive, so it would be somewhere here. And then passing through that sort of thing. Okay, so where do we find the maximum distance for this graph? So it's like the distance between these two, or between the whatevers. But they told us we have an interval between -1 and 0. So we're only focusing on the left-hand side. So this area, where do we find the distance to be maximum? So for us to get the distance between any two graphs, get the graph on top minus the graph that is a bit below. Okay, so it's my f, which f is x cubed minus x squared minus 5x minus 3. I'm gonna subtract my first derivative, 3x squared minus 2x minus 5, and then I'll have x cubed. Can I just change this? Doubt whether it's visible enough. Okay, x cubed minus x squared minus 5x minus 3. This is gonna be minus 3x squared plus 2x plus 5. Okay, I'll collect my like terms. X cubed doesn't have a like term, so x cubed So minus and minus will give me minus 4x squared. Are we on the right track? Yes. Okay. And then this and this will give me minus 3x. Minus 3 and this will get a positive 2. So this represents our distance between the two graphs. Now for me to find the maximum distance or minimum distance, I'll always find the first derivative. So first derivative of this, if I call this d, then I'll have my d dx. Okay, so it's going to be 3x squared minus 8x minus 3. I'll equate that to 0. I can do my factors, which means I have 3x, that is x, 1 and a 3. Can have this as a plus and a minus, so which means x is negative 1 over 3 or x is a positive 3. So it's between 2 points that we shall have a maximum. Okay, but the equation or the question was telling us the limit is between negative 1 and 0. So which means this positive 3 is not applicable, so we shall use this. Take this, substitute it into the equation of the distance. So it's gonna be negative 1 over 3 cubed minus 4 times 1 over 3 squared minus 3 times 1 over 3 negative, plus 2. Plus 2. Comrades, what do we get? If you have the machines, let's use the machines. Just punch that into your calculator and let's see what we get. So 1 over 3, we said it's a negative, and then we are putting that to the exponent of 3 minus 4 into still negative 1 over 3. Lord, what did I do wrong? What I knew about technology. Minus 4, we're saying negative 1 over 3. And then we're squaring this. Technology. Okay, 3 into, that is minus 3. Sorry guys, don't want to make any mistakes. Okay, there we go. So the answer I'm ending up with is weird, guys. It's very weird, but let me do it again. You don't want to get weird things that are gonna scare people. Negative 1 over 3 squared. We are subtracting 3 into negative 1 over 3, and then we are adding a 2. Guys, is that the equation that we're substituting into? All right, so I'm getting 68 over 27, which is the same as 2,5 something. So that is the maximum distance. Maximum distance. So guys, that's question number 9. Okay, and then next we have question number 10, the last one. They're telling us that flags from 4 African countries, this is probability, and 3 European countries are displayed in a row during the 2021 Olympics. Okay, the total of the possible ways in which all the 7 flags from these countries could be displayed. All right, so in this case, since we're looking at the possible ways, we can just say, since we have 7 flags, just 7 factorial. So all the 7 flags can be interchangeably moved in 7 factorial ways. So 7 factorial with the machine, I have 5040, 5040 ways in which we can move those flags. Then 10.1.2, they want the probability that the flags from the African countries were displayed. The probability that the flags from African countries were displayed next to each other. Okay, so since we have 7, 5, 6, 7. So I will take these 4 flags from Africa to be just a single unit. Okay, so which means in every position they move, they can be here as the first position, they can change to this as the second, the third, and then the fourth, which means they can move 4 places interchangeably. That's 4 factorial. And then within themselves, these flags can also change. The first one can be the second, and so something like that. So which means we also have another 4 factorial ways. So 4 factorial times 4 factorial gives me 576. The question is asking me for the probability. So it's going to be 576 divided by the 50/40. So 576 divided by 50/40, I'm getting 4/35. Okay, so that is my probability. You can give it like this, or you can even give it as a decimal, 0.11, something like that. Guys, next 10.2. A and B are 2 independent events. Keyword here, independent. What do we know about independent events? The probability of A and B is given as the probability of A times the probability of B. Okay, they're telling us probability of A is this, probability of A or B is this, calculate probability of B. So from that addition rule, from that formula of probability, we're saying the probability of A or B is given as the probability of A plus the probability of B minus the probability of A and B. Okay, do the substitution. A or B is 0.88. My probability of A is 0.4. B, I don't know. Minus, since they are independent, I'll apply this thing. Okay, my A is gonna be 0.4 times the probability of B. Okay, then I'll move this to that side, subtract, that is 0.48. This is 1 full probability of B minus 0.4 probability of B. Okay, then that will give me 0.6. This alone is 0.6 probability of B. Divide both sides by 0.6, so probability of B becomes 0.48 divided by 0.6. Guys, what do we get? Comrades, help me. So we get 4/5. Thank you. So that becomes the answer for the probability of B. 10.2. 10.2. All right, 10.3. 10.3 is telling us that we have 120 passengers on board. Okay, passengers have a choice between meat, sandwich, or the cheese. But more passengers will choose meat. So meat has more clients. Nyama. This meat has more clients. Okay. We have 120 sandwiches, and each one must at least choose one. Okay. The probability that the first passenger chooses meat sandwich and the second one chooses cheese is 18/35. Sorry, 18/85. Calculate the probability that the first passenger will choose cheese. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna use some sort of a tree diagram. Okay, so with my tree diagram, I'll have meat, I'll have cheese. Okay, so that is for the first passenger. If the first passenger chooses meat, second passenger can choose meat or cheese. If the first one is cheese, then this can be meat or cheese. But they're telling us with the outcomes that the probability that the first passenger chooses meat and the second chooses cheese is 18/35. So if I follow this, meat and cheese, this is 18/35. Do I know how many partaking meat? No. Cheese? No. So if I call this X, the people that love meat, is X, which means the probability here is going to be X over 120. Then the probability of cheese will be 120 minus X over 120. So if we have 10 meat whatevers, then it will be 120 minus 10. and then that's the probability. Okay, but since now this is like choosing without replacement, the denominator is going to reduce. Okay, so the meat will reduce to x minus 1 over 119, and then this one is going to be 120 minus x over 119, since they haven't chosen any cheese in this category. So we take this 120 minus x over 119. Okay, so my point of focus is just this and that. So for me to get the probability of MC, I just multiply the probability of M times the probability of this to give me that. So it's going to be x over 120 times 120 minus x over 119. It should give me 18 over 35. Okay. Then from that, I can, I don't know, what do I do? Multiply, cross multiply, whatever. So I'll multiply these two. Okay, so this is like a bracket. So it's like 120 times x, that's 120x. This and that, I have minus x squared is equal to, when I multiply 120 times 119, yo, it's a very big number. 14218. So I'll have 18 over 35 times 14218. So 120x minus x squared is equal to, that's 18 divided by, sorry, it's 85. What's wrong with me, man? This is 85, not 35. Okay, so I'll have 30 and then 24. So I have a quadratic. Then I'll have to solve this quadratic using my ways. So either quadratic formula or factor formula, whichever one. So I'll take that one aside. So I'll have x squared minus 120x, boom, plus 30, 24 is equal to 0. So if I use my quadratic formula, my a is 1, my b is negative 120, and then my c is 30, and then 24. So negative b plus minus b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Okay, so our b is negative 120. So negative and negative 120 plus minus the square root of negative 120 squared minus 4. Our a is 1. Then our c is 3024. Is that true? Does it make sense though? 120 squared. Okay. Let me just check something. Okay, makes sense. Over 2 times 1. Okay, when I do that, what I'm ending up with my machine, my calculator, 3024. Guys, be careful when you're substituting, because some people make mistakes, errors that were costly. Okay, so my x values are basically 36, or my x is gonna be 84. Those are the two values of x that we expect. What was the question asking for? Okay, question was saying calculate the probability that the first passenger will choose a cheese sandwich. So between 84 and 36, they told us that the passengers, more passengers choose meat. So which means this x was representing the meat people. The meat people were x. So the bigger x must go for the meat, and then the smaller one must go for the cheese. Smaller one must go for the cheese. So 84 is gonna be for the meat people. Nyama. And then this is gonna be for those people that love cheese, for the first person that loves cheese. Okay, so now the question wants the probability. So that will be 36 over 120. You simplify this, you get 3 over 10 or 0.3. Question answered. So guys, that we come to the end of the paper. That is what we had to do within this question paper. It was pretty fair. I wouldn't say it was that rough. It was fair enough. anybody would have obtained the maximum mark. Guys, we need to capitalize on paper 1 and get as many marks as we can, so that when paper 2 comes, it's all about being strategic. Ne? Thank you very much, guys, for watching. Let's meet in paper 2.